Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. You want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there.
I will say this about Kansas City, and listen, it's like Kerr and Curry. Like, you never feel bad about betting on those guys in a big game. It doesn't mean they're always going to win it, though. And I would say this about Travis Kelce. I was talking to someone about this a couple days ago. He's kind of looked old this year.
Oh, yeah.
And part of it, he had knee injury right before the season started. He's had ankle injuries. He just kind of looks old. And this is the NFL, where you don't always see it coming. I mean, he's one of the greatest players of all time. He's one of my favorite players to watch. But he's looked his age a little bit. And he's no longer, and their receivers are young. There was a report today they've had to do some extra film work about some adjustments. That's a work in progress. Maybe it's just like Belichick and Brady didn't win the Super Bowl every year. Remember the Jets got him one year. They got taken down every once in a while. And maybe just this, even watching today against the Raiders, who I don't think are very good, was a pretty tight game for a while. Now, the Chiefs are ultimately better. They got a better coach and obviously a better quarterback. But you watch him, you go, I don't know. Because if Travis is no longer an A-plus player, and let's say he's a B-minus player, well, the rest around there, they're so dependent on their defense, which is good.
Yes.
But, you go against Lamar, you go against it. Like, the game could get weird, and all of a sudden you just lose a 19-17 playoff game. And that's where I think they've opened themselves up to for the first time. To me, Travis flying to Taylor and being in love, it has nothing to do with that. It's simply, he's a 34-year-old guy with a lot of miles on his body who's starting to get banged up and his game's very predicated on athleticism, right? Movement, speed, explosiveness. And he just feels like a step slow this year.
Yeah, and continuing on with the Chiefs and the Raiders, you're talking about an interim coach, an immobile backup quarterback.
Yeah.
And that game was 14-14, and I until about 7 minutes left, until that big Rashee Rice touchdown, I was like, or that big play by him, I forgot if it was a touchdown, but it was like...
Yeah, it was a touchdown. He cut it back.
Okay. And my takeaway was, it's a real game. And here's the thing about those players. So Watson's not a great athlete. Rashee Rice is a great athlete, but he's inexperienced. Tony's more of a gadget player who I don't trust. Yeah. He's got very regrettable hands. So, and Sky Moore is just a guy. So you start looking around, they don't have a number one. I think Rice, to me, feels like he'd be a really, really explosive two with like one talent, more of a two. And a lot of this stuff is that these guys come out of college, John. They're not always like Josh Allen. They're not always particularly well coached. They don't have the route tree down. They just need time. I mean, tight ends historically struggle in year one. Some receivers, the great ones like Jamar, Justin Jefferson can make an impact. In most cases, though, it's because the quarterback's really good, right? It helps to have Burrow or even a veteran like Kirk Cousins. But I just look at Kansas City, and I said this last week. They've moved into the second phase of the dynasty. The first phase is Mahomes is cheap. They can play down 21, up 21. They look faster, smarter, and they have a ton of weapons. Phase two, they've entered. Travis Kelce, their best player, is wobbling. They've had to move off players because of Mahomes now is expensive. Their defense is the best it's been. So they're now carried kind of by their defense. And so it's like phase two for the Patriots was no Super Bowls. Now they got to them, they were close, but phase one was Tom was a game manager becoming a big time player, defense. Phase two was the Randy Moss Welker, which was explosive, almost offensive led. And then phase three was Tom, Edelman, Gronk. He got his favorite weapons ever. Excellent O-line play. And it was a combination of they could be explosive, but they weren't as explosive as Moss, right? And I think with Kansas City, they're just not as explosive. They can't play down 21-0 to teams. So that's why, by the way, if you've noticed, John, they don't experiment as much. They're pretty good on script early now because I think they know. I think initially with Patrick, you could roll the dice. I think they come in scripted. They need a lead.
Well, I thought last year was going to be their transitional year. It turns out they won the Super Bowl. Yeah. But it turns out this year is. And I think this offseason, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to win the Super Bowl.